Good morning, good evening, good day, greetings, and salutations. And might I throw in a welcome? How are you? And also, the Safe Room features security side quest is happening now. So thank you for joining myself, Tristan, and Russ, who is also, see, I'm reversing now, the marvelous, the great, the gracious host with the most. I think I had a 90 saying for a second for there. But thank you for joining today. And for you first time joiners, thank you for tuning in. Because allow me to reintroduce myself one more time. I am Tristan Wadi. I come to you from the Professional Services Division of AWS, where we help to accelerate customers' journey to the cloud in a secure manner, fashion, way, and form. And Russ, where are you coming from?
I'm coming from the customer incident response team. We help our customers contain and remediate incidents. Hope I don't have to see it.
Yeah, that is always, I'm going to get a shirt. It's just like, I hope I don't have to see you. And if you saw it, it's just like, I was almost there. But you also get a shirt that says, you're doing great now because you saw me, right? Both ways. So
the front and the back.
Yeah.
That way as you're walking away.
Yeah. Right? Always a little bit. But as always, feel free. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Where are you from? We always like to see. Is it today, tomorrow, or is it really early in the morning for you? Always.
As I put it or are you drinking coffee at 2 p.m.?
Yeah. Are you drinking coffee at 2 p.m. or 8 p.m.? And is there a difference really? No. But I would also ask and pose the question out to the audience, because we always do two. The second one is going to be, what's your favorite collecting-based game? Yes, I know it's a little broad, a little ambiguous, but we also say hello to the dog as well as Pete from Georgia. Thanks for joining in. Harry, as always, hello. And I pose this and throw this to Russ. Favorite collecting-based game? You decide.
Yeah, so there's a lot of thought that went into this, and then I kind of gave up after halfway and was like, you know what, it's just got to be Pokemon.
Yes.
That is a classic as a kid. I don't follow a lot of the newer ones. I try to stick with like first generation, but overall, Pokemon.
Nice. The original 151, and it's 11 a.m. Drinking coffee. Yes, always great. That sounds like a good time. But that is a good choice, because if you haven't heard of Pokemon, there's a little thing. Just Google it sometimes, or go on YouTube. You'll see about it. But for me, I go the opposite side of the spectrum, and I like to notate something that's a little bit less known, and that is Digimon. So if you haven't been appraised or heard about Digimon, that's something else to take a little read, a little side quest on, because it's near and dear to my heart, mainly because of the theme song, but also because of the fun that comes with it.
I was just singing the theme song in my head.
It helps. And then the second choice, I would go with Yu-Gi-Oh! Because of the Bridge series and things of that nature. That's always a classic as well. But I digress, because we have some fun planned today. And with that theme being set up with collecting-based game, I would say we should start with our first poll. I think that kind of sets up our story today, right? So put in 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 into chat to pick your starter security service. And 10 billion points to you if you start to get the reference of where this episode is going. A little bit off the rails, but don't worry, we're going to the same destination. Russ.
I feel like that's a bit of a kind of how our show goes every week anyway. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think for me, I started with IAM. But I think for me, if I could choose, I'd probably go guard duty. Like for me, but I think IAM is kind of IAM is my Charizard. It's the one that I always stick with, no matter what. So
yeah, that is a good choice. Yeah, especially since we say least privilege, least privilege, least privilege. We say 3 times people on the other side of the internet, and we have a couple of 3s. We have a 5. Yes, 5 is a good choice. I am. And see, the interesting is like if you had to choose your starter security service, the way I interpret this and read this is I can have more than one, right? This is just one you pick off the bat and just saying, hey, this is great, this is shiny. How do I use this? I would go down the guard duty route because it is so all encompassing. When you need some compliance metrics, where's a lot of the compliance metrics being generated from? Just from, hey, what happened in the environment? This kicks off a lot of automations, and guard duty is usually at the core, the center of the team, as long as identity is there and things of that nature. But we have some fun, right? So guard duty, that's where I go. But the unsung hero of today, or the hero we sing about, is going to be a little bit different. And we have to zoom in to really focus on that and bring that to the attention of everybody. And Russ, what is today's topic, and where were we last week that we needed to come to today's topic?
Definitely. So last week was our advanced DevSecOps episode. Toss a scan to your pipeline. Nothing to do with coins and witchers. And then this week is our Macie episode. So our Macie used scan. It's super effective. DLP tools. So today we're going to go over primarily Macie, but going over DLP, kind of some of our, how to use DLP, when to use it, some special capabilities of Macie and other DLP tools, kind of the usual, what it is, how to use it, and how to integrate it into your own environment.
Yes. And it is very important to understand DLP as a whole, right? Even if you put AWS services aside, what is your data loss prevention strategy? That is something that you want to think of. Maybe on a daily basis, a little bit more. And I also point out, IAM is king, says Cameron. I mean, two services everyone has. IAM and bill. Maybe billing should have been one of the stars.
Actually,
right?
that is a great one.
Yeah, right? It's just like billing alerts. Make sure you set them. So as Russ was saying, as we start to delve in to the topic of DLP, we start to go into understanding what it encompasses, right? What are the technology? What is some of the strategy? What are the texting methods? All those kind of things, because there's a lot to it. It's not as simple and clear cut as, it might be. And then how do we adapt our environments to those requirements, to those standards, to those things that we're thinking about that go bump in the night? Well, use, in this case, Macie as one of the core services and core capabilities. And you start to build your team, because we were talking about starters. So how do we build out our team with Macie on it? And where does Macie fit in? And eventually, when we have our team, how do we level up our security strategy? It's a good place to be, because with your DLP strategy, it involves a progressive maturity stage, right? We talk about crawl and walk and run, but I think there's a lot of micro steps in between that, right? A little bits. I don't know what they're called. I'll use micro steps, but
little stutter steps.
Yeah, little stutters, right? A little bit, because part of that is walking into the unknown. Sometimes you have the checks and the balances that you need to adhere to, but also it's getting familiar with the technologies that are out there to help enable you to take that full step from the crawl to the walk phase. So that's what we hope to do today, of just figuring out that piece of, hey, how do you gradually expand your coverage when it comes to DLP, and how do you implement a DLP strategy? All good things to know about. But I think it also calls for another poll. We're a little poll happy today, right? Because it's a fun topic. So the next poll: what security type are you? This is an interesting one, right? Are you fire type, water type, electric type, psychic, ground, right? And each one of these correspond to different areas that you can think of, i.e. incident response, data protection, threat detection, predictive security, foundation security. A couple different ways. Feel free to put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the chat.
Yep.
But Russ, where are you leaning?
So I just got to go with fire type. I mean, that one's a pretty obvious one for me. But if I could, just real quick, I'm fighter type for sure. Would be Charizard if I could, but I'm definitely not at that level as much as I would like to be. Because who is? I mean, Charizard's a dragon. But yeah, definitely fire type. I think most people, especially security engineers, tend to do a little bit of everything. We have to not be weak in any of these types. But yeah, I'm interested to see what everyone else says and where they're coming from. And
yeah, exactly. And I also take the pause to say hello, my Dusk. Thank you for joining. So when I think of this, is exactly what you said. It's just like, oh, what's my weakness and things of that nature. That's why when you start to put together your team from a service perspective, but a cultural perspective, you want to make sure that you cover all of the different bases, right? So I would start to go down the route of a ground type just based on kind of what I've seen from the day-to-day of the basics, right? What is your foundational? What is your minimum security baseline? What is your target state security strategy? What is your IAM strategy? All the basic stuff. We don't have to get into the advanced items, but it's some of the core fundamentals that we often see customers kind of, oh, we'll get back to that, right? What is your tagging strategy? Oh, we'll create that later, right? And then you have 10 different tagging strategies, and then something doesn't get caught. And it starts to get down that path of technical debt. And that's what we're trying to avoid, right? Is all that excess technical debt that's built up by, I'll get back to that. So starting out with a strong foundation is kind of where I lean. So if we were to keep that same thought process rolling, if you think of DLP in the cloud, now you start to go down the path of one, saying hello to Victor, but two, you start to think of all the different pieces and how they need to fit in, right? Because cloud adoption as a whole transformed how organizations store, process, share, and with that comes new security challenges, right? So the traditional on-prem mindset is not necessarily going to adapt and play into the rules of a cloud mindset. So when you talk about the fundamentals of your DLP in your cloud, now you have to adjust your mindset. One is, do you understand the shared responsibility model? That's a key aspect and key thought process, right? And then the next piece of that is starting to get down the route of, okay, this is what we're responsible for, but how do I create something that's compliant, right? What are my compliance requirements? All these questions start to bubble up to the top if we use those type of terms. And I think I want to get your opinion on this as well, Ross, is when you start to think of like common data exposure scenarios that you've seen or heard or read about, you start to think of maybe misconfigurations, or where does your brain go?
so when we're talking about cloud specifically, I immediately go to long-lived credentials. For me, that's immediately what I think of. Because it's just so much easier once they have authorization. So I see that the most, especially when we're talking about like data exfiltration or some sort of extortion type scheme where I have your data, give me money type thing. I see that a lot with long-lived credentials. So even though you might be taking all of the right steps to secure your database, if someone's able to create a key pair, then you're kind of out of luck. So that's where I immediately think. But there's so many different ways that it can be done, especially in and outside of the cloud. But yeah, I think my go-to is long-lived credentials instead of using short-lived tokens and stuff like that.
Yeah,
that's immediately what I think of.
Yeah, and That is a good point too, because often what you see is that exact thing. It's like, oh, it's working, so look, nobody touch it, nobody breathe on it. That's kind of like the unspoken rules until it goes 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and then all of a sudden something happens within the environment, and you're like, oh, when is this last rotated? And it's like, well, see what happened.
Right? Yeah, you look at that 2017 date, and you're like,
yeah, exactly. And then Victor has a couple. DLP for Defender for Endpoint is the best, along remediation, and if your network not compromised. And today, I improved the AWS services. That's always a good thing to do, is working on your environment and kind of improving, taking one step at a time. We always talk about building those XP points. And the one thing that we're trying to get across to help build some of that experience is understanding, okay, what are some of the common items when you think of your DLP? We talked about some potential data exposure items and risks, right? I also call out and make a point to say third-party service integrations, things of that nature, because what you have handshakes with and what's connected to your environment. API integrations, because, hey, there's a lot of API that's based in the cloud. Right? If you aren't aware of how it takes place, then that's something that you have to consider when you're thinking of your DLP, right? It's those fundamental pieces. So going down that same thought process, I think it's also important to understand, hey, there's some real world consequences that come with all of these data breaches, right? There's cost considerations and legal fees and regulatory penalties, all these items. And it usually comes back down to the one, documentation, but two, the understanding of how everything is put together and how your team is built. Because when you look at, okay, show me what happened here, it kicks off a number of different things. If you're talking about AWS, your CloudTrail logs, your guard duty. Oh, how did that sensitive data piece get exfiltrated from your environment? How were you able to detect it or not detect it? Right? Those are the questions that start to spawn. So we talked about identity, but if you are thinking of maybe a compliance requirement like GDPR, HIPAA, PCI, one of those, now you're starting to factor in, okay, what is my data protection strategy? If I have to follow GDPR, right, it mandates comprehensive, pretty much data governance throughout your environment. So how do you kind of move towards that structure? I think it's an important consideration, and something like Macie and using a cloud native solution like it will help to address some of these requirements. So first part I always like to say is documentation. Two is understanding the basics and the fundamentals, your ground security, and then you start to get into the items like DLP, and and DLP is a great feature. Yes, I agree, concur. Yes, 100%, 10 points to Gryffindor. So when you think of DLP, you should think of, okay, my overall strategy, my documentation. Now, what services? What actual applications am I using? Mm-hmm. And if you think of Macie, you start to think of, okay, what makes Macie special? And I think that's when we start to get into the superpower side of it, right, Russ? What is one of Macie's superpowers, if you were to come off the top of your head with it?
I'd say it's superpower because it is it's continuous scanning is my biggest superpower for Macie. So it's continuously scanning S3 buckets, looking for any sort of pattern recognition that's based off of the ML, the machine learning, and also the as it's the data discovery itself, the continuous scanning is also able to handle like very large volumes of data relatively efficiently. Which can sometimes be an issue with security tooling. But yeah, so the automated too many D's in that. Automated data discovery is one of the key aspects of Macie. So like, yes, there's lots of data discovery going on all the time. So what is it looking for, right? So Macie's going to be looking for sensitive data like PII, financial data, so like credit card numbers, bank numbers, stuff like that, healthcare information, intellectual property. It also does credentials and secrets, so like secret keys and stuff like that. So it does actually give you a pretty comprehensive view of sensitive data in your environment just by using that the machine learning based pattern recognition. You can use I think they have like the pre-configured sensitive data types, so you can use the pre-built-in identifiers, but there's also custom data identifiers, so you don't have to rely on just what AWS says is important, because every customer has their own idea of what's important for them, what their critical information is. So you can use your own defined patterns, especially for your specific organization, instead or in addition to some of those built-in data identifiers. So that way, if you have something more specific than healthcare information, or looking for something additional on top of that, you can build those in, which is great. Another superpower that Macie has is compliance requirements. So it does support the compliance requirements for GDPR, HIPAA, PCI DSS, basically all of the large compliance governing bodies. Macie does the automated reporting and alerting for the major compliance bodies, which is extremely useful because DLP is so ingrained into compliance, but also integrates with Security Hub, so that way you can have all of your compliance in one centralized location. So its integration with Security Hub, also a superpower. The cost is also an extreme benefit, because model instead of a constant, and then some of the other optimization strategies that are available within Macie really allows you to kind of build up or reduce down to whatever cost or optimization is really most comfortable for you and your organization, which I really like. So there's a lot that Macie does and can do that really makes it a much stronger service than I think it gets credit for sometimes. Because it's not just like a GitHub scanner for credentials. Like, it's doing so much more, on the back end with compliance, integrating with Security Hub, and yeah. So I think that's kind of where where the main superpowers for Macie lie.
Yeah, and I also bring up this question from Bevan, because how can someone come up with Macie like a SaaS? So the way I interpret this question is, how does Macie kind of align with, pick your own SaaS solution, right?
Mm.
So when you think of your overall export workflow, that's one way to take a look at it, right? So if you have your SaaS data exported to a S3 bucket, now you can leverage Macie in a way that, hey, is there any sensitive information that's getting exported, right, that you may have not thought of? And you can come up with your own custom identifiers and things of that nature if it falls out of like financial data, PII, or something along those lines. Because like Russ was saying, if there's something specific to how your company makes the secret sauce in a numerical format or something along those lines, now you can have these scanners run to pick up on it. So I think that's one way. So think of your workflow, then you can integrate into your pipelines, because there's a couple of different ways to leverage it, where you have some ETL that happens before it gets to the S3 bucket. So I think it's an important thing to consider, right? And that's kind of one of the superpowers. You just got to figure out how to leverage it within your environment. And that's kind of where we start to think of, hey, how do you handle DLP? Or what is your DLP strategy? That's why that important question keeps getting asked. Because if you have, let's say, a SaaS solution, okay, where's that SaaS solution being backed up? How is it being backed up? Right? Okay, are you taking advantage of maybe the backup features of S3? Now you can integrate Macie into scanning those buckets, right? So all those pieces of the puzzle. And as you start to go down that route, then you can start to have other considerations, right? Like cost optimization and other cost consideration conversations. But first is talking about and documenting, right? So Victor is true. Even DLP, we need uncompromised network to be perfect or effective much as we can. So that's the defense in depth approach. So when you start to think of DLP, it's just one piece of the puzzle. It's one layer, one thing around your castle. You start to look at everything holistically so that you can take these different pieces and dive a little bit deeper into it. Because essentially what you're trying to do is fortify everything, right? But in order to fortify, you kind of have to have a framework. And what is your framework? Well, it's based on what is your overall business requirements? What are the goals? Because you want to make sure your IT goals are aligned with your business goals, right? So if you're trying to work internationally, for example, now you have international compliance like regulations and requirements that you have to adhere to. And so when you're doing that, now you start to think of, okay, now we have to think of GDPR. We have to think of how our data is stored. Where's our data sovereignty? Things of that nature. So that also boils down into, hey, let's have that DLP discussion as a whole, right? So things like that. But I think as part of the conversation, you also have to start to think of, hey, what have I seen? What have I heard from maybe a legendary standpoint? So, of course, I just want to take the second to say and give the round of applause right there. Right? For what reason? Because it's a side quest legend. So we'll cue the music and jump right into it, right? As we're having some fun. So when you first hear this side quest music, we start to get to the point of asking ourselves, what is a customer story that we can relate to, especially when it comes to this DLP strategy we keep talking about, especially using Macie. So take this, for example, is as we start to think of maybe, let's say, a large financial company. We'll call it cloud finance, right? I think that works. So as we get into the cloud finance, maybe they have embraced the AWS as their platform of choice, and maybe they have a lot of analytics that goes into that. So with analytics comes data science teams. And maybe those data science teams, they're starting to develop some insights, leveraging maybe S3 buckets, right? Surprise. So if they're using S3 buckets for, let's say, data lakes, and they're sharing analytics across departments because this is what they're trying to do. They're trying to optimize. Well, maybe something happens, something occurs, i.e. compliance audit. Now, they discovered significant data protection gaps, right? You didn't see where the story was going. But while cloud finance had the basic S3 bucket policies and say, hey, we have some security. Now we start to think of, hey, maybe we lack some comprehensive visibility into this. Now we start to think of, wait, how do we check for PII? How do we identify some basic patterns of how you're handling these data points? And this is how we turn and why we turn to a legend. Because as legends have it, of the side quest variety, we start to go down and pull out our favorite thing. And what is that favorite thing? It is the side quest board. And for your first time joining the side quest board, is essentially a visualization of our AWS environment and our customer story that we start to talk about and think about. Hey, this is a short route, right? So Why do I say it's a short route? Well, usually we have the whole board that we start to think about. But in this case, we have people closer than expected to our S3 bucket. And why is that? Because the S3 bucket may be public. And if there's a public S3 bucket, our authenticated users are trying to protect, trying to secure said S3 bucket. But based on our scenario, they have to understand the data protection strategy. So, in alignment with our theme and our side quests legend, Russ, you said you liked Pokemon, so we're going to go with Pokemon. So, what Pokemon move best describes your data protection strategy in this use case?
Oh, in this use, okay. That is unfortunate. I was going to go with Snorlax, but I was going to work him in, but I guess... I'd probably go with Rhydon.
Okay.
The rhinoceros.
I have questions.
let me explain why. All right, because Macie goes through like a rhino, all right, and just bashes through all of this data and gets right to the source of it.
Right to the source.
That's what I'm going with.
So we have the direct route. You see how short that is? That's just a short route, right? It just bashes right through. See?
Exactly.
So when we're thinking of this, so we have our cloud finance company, and it's starting to think of how do we secure this S3 bucket? Well, they had some bucket policies, but the main thing that they have to consider, especially when they're looking at the next steps, is okay. We have Macie implemented in the environment, but we have people right here looking at it. So we need some additional services to detect. Because what were we just talking about? We were talking about workflows. So I'm going to take a little bit of a roundabout approach to saying and throwing down step functions face up. Because if something were to trigger, all right, what happens within the environment? Well, this is what we want to start to get to, because in our overall use case, the customer had a bunch of challenges. They had some maybe uncontrollable, unvisible data because it grew. They started to do analytics. They had limited visibility, right, to that sensitive data. So we have Macie in there. But might I also add, they might have some challenges with data classification. Because if they're starting to grow their environment in such a way, manner, fashion, and form that they said, oh, how do we identify PII? Chances are they don't have a tagging strategy in place. So one of the things that we could start to put into place is some event-driven architecture to say, hey, if you do not have a tag, then you do not do X. And maybe using a step function is a way to do so. Or I would even put a lambda function right here. Let me turn it around just so there's a couple different routes that we could take, right? And why do we say the lambda function right there? Well, it depends on the organization's maturity level. Because if they are at the level where they're asking some of these questions, they might not be at a run phase. They might not be at a walk phase. They might be more at the crawl in that micro stutter step, as we call. So as we continue down our path, another place to consider, to have, to act is if something were to occur within the environment to that data, I also place down guard duty. And I take the dramatic pause for the reason because there's some solutions that you need to have in place, right? So if something were to be detected, now with this event-driven architecture in place, you have some Lambda functions, you have Macie, you start to build out a framework that can support you. In what way? Well, it's a step in the direction, right? And the direction that we're heading towards is how do we build out our DLP strategy? And this is one of the methods that we do so. So before we leave this, if sensitive data was a Pokemon, Russ, what type would it be? I can't leave without asking that because you said Rhydon first. So sensitive data was a Pokemon. Which one would it be?
I believe it would be ponyta. Because if you don't control it, it will run wild and set everything aflame.
I clap for this, and you made my Pokemon heart proud with that one, because you could have been easily said and went down the path of like, oh, it's a Diglett, because it goes away under you can't see it anymore. So we have to take that second to first hit the good old pause game, Zach Moore's timeout, as we call, and readjust, because it's important. We jest with our analogies, but the one thing we don't jest with is that the data protection need is very real to our organization. And there's different solutions that you can talk about, you can implement, you can think about. But the one thing to take away is, as your organization starts to grow, it starts to become technical debt in the way that it becomes a little bit unmanageable to say, okay, this bucket definitely only has non-sensitive information. Oh, this person definitely only needs access to this, right? Oh, but they changed teams. Do they still need access, or whatever the case may be? So you need some mechanism, you need some tool sets. And that's where something like Macie comes into play, right? Because when you have something like Macie, you can have the automated data discovery feature where it takes a statistical sampling of your data to say, well, based on this, it can kind of figure out a little bit more about how your data is stored, so it doesn't have to do a full scan, right? So those type of things, and building up your team, as we spoke about, is important, because we mentioned step functions and event-driven workflows and Lambdas and Macie, but there's other unsung heroes that we have to talk about, like Security Hub, right? I always mention Security Hub, but I also mention Event Bridge too, because if you set up, yeah, see, Russ went to the seminar. So when you start to think of Event Bridge, you think of Event Bridge rules, automated response, and that starts to go right into Russ's side of the fence, right? Of, hey, what's your automated incident response posture, I would say? Because when you start to occur or have something happen with your environment, how does it automatically, remediate and then tell you about it later? Because what we're trying to get to is, what's your security evolution strategy? We're going to continue with that theme because I think it's working. But
it does.
It's building.
It's very on theme. Yeah.
Right? It's building. So when you're working with the different AWS security services, you try to balance out your team with your target state security strategy in such a way that it can build a comprehensive data protection solution. So you're not just relying on one service or one particular item or application. You have a comprehensive one. And then you can start to create workflows that work for your organization. Because as your organization starts to mature, so does your workflow. Starting with the basic notification process and then evolving a little bit up towards some sophisticated audit remediation. Okay? With some human oversight. You always want to have some humans in the loop. And then you can have some Gen AI built in into it, but there's other services that use generative AI, but that's a side quest for another day. But one of the key things is that alert management and the response strategies, right? So one of the things that you have to start to consider and think about is managing the volume and complexity of findings, because Macie is sophisticated, but you still have to maintain and think about the alerts that are being generated, right? Just like other services like guard duty and things of that nature, you can have them build up, but if you don't have some mechanisms to take care of it, then they start to become that technical debt of, I'll come back to it. And that eventually boils into a potential risk within your environment. So oftentimes you want to implement a risk-based prioritization, I would say, of ensuring that the high impact findings involving sensitive data that are exposed, especially from a location or a resource, or have some immediate attention to it. Low risk items, they are addressed through maybe like schedule reviews or something along those lines. Russ, from your side, how often do you see this kind of response strategy where they kind of treat everything the same, and that's kind of where it kind of goes off the rails a little bit.
Very often. Usually they're coming to see me because they don't have those sorts of things. So they don't have any mechanism to be able to not even just look through their alerts, but to, to confirm those alerts. Like, if you have all of these alerts and you don't know what is a false positive or a false negative or true positive, true negative, then how useful are those alerts? You know something's happening, but you don't know, if it is actually happening or if it's something that needs to, human intervention. So I'd say I see it all the time, but that's one of those things, where you, I forget that bias with the planes and the bullet holes in them and the survivorship bias. There's a little bit of that in my answer, but implementing those things is how you don't have to come and see me, is having those auto remediated steps and mechanisms and actually doing something with those alerts other than, having to go to support and to my team to confirm whether those are real or not. Having those all in place saves you a lot of time and energy from, having to have all of that manual manual oversight into those processes instead of having it done near instantly with a simple automation. So a lot of time, a lot of energy gets, a little bit wasted when these sorts of processes aren't properly set up or aren't set up at all.
Yeah, exactly. And that's usually the case that we'll get back to it, right? Because we have to launch this application. We have to launch this, or we have to get to this certain point, and then we'll fix it later. Fun fact, it doesn't ever come later until something forces it to come later. Usually a compliance audit or, i.e., to Russ's point,
a trip to my team.
Yeah, right? So those kind of things. But what you want to start to put into place outside of the basic items like, hey, do you have tagging? Hey, is there automated maybe data quarantine workflow or something along those lines, right? Are you maintaining comprehensive audit log trails through CloudTrail? And one of the things that you start to move towards is what is my entire estate? And what I mean by that is, hey, maybe you're in AWS organizations. Are all my accounts providing the adequate amount of information back to me so I can manage appropriately, right? And to Victor's point, hey, geo can cause a lot of misconfigurations. Yeah, it's one of those things where you might have different teams spread throughout the world, and you have to have considerations for how everything is handled. So one of the things is cross-account visibility. That's an important thing, especially within a multi-account AWS environment. So when you are requiring coordinated cross-account visibility, you have to have all these pieces in play, right? A delegated administrator for one, right? Which allows security teams to pretty much designate a central administrative account. And then with that, you can provide and gain a little bit more information and see what's happening throughout the organization. But I think the other piece is the upskilling. We talked about culture in our DevSecOps piece. And I think having the basics down is part of that DevSecOps culture. Because if you look at the typical user within the environment that has nothing to do with coding or the infrastructure, they might have a folder that says data. And they might have another folder that says data 1 and then data 2, right? And to that user might make perfect sense. But if you do not know or that user moves on, then what is data 1, 2, 3, 4? What does it mean to your organization? So I think that brings us to the next kind of poll that we start to think of. And that poll is, hey, what is your security training method? This is part of the culture, right? So thinking of this is part of the overall strategy. Because if you were to pick 1, 2, 3, or 4 or 5, are you thinking of learn by doing, workshops, documentation, certification, and team sharing. Each of these can have a fun equivalent if we go on our theme, right?
Yeah.
The trainer battles and wild encounters and Elite Four challenges, right? Feel free to put in the chat which one you lean towards. And as always, I throw it to Russ first to go. Which one do you pick?
So it's hard, right? Because I want to pick all of them. But I would probably go with 1 or 2. I think that 2 is nice because it is low stakes, and it's a simulated environment, which is always nice. But wild encounters, actual learning by doing, is definitely the best way. A little bit higher risk, especially if you're using your own AWS, like personal AWS account, and then all of a sudden you see $300 worth of charges, and you're like, no, what have I done? But learn by doing, for me, without a simulated environment, with actual, enterprise, environments and organizations is the way to learn. But again, that there is a higher risk there. So the workshops is a good alternate. So I guess I'd go with wild encounters, learn by doing as like my 1, and then my trainer battles is my trainer battles, the workshops is 1, and learn by doing is like 1A. It would be ideal if it weren't for the fact that there is risk involved because you are doing, security solutions on an enterprise solution or environment. So that's what I'm going to go with.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the other thing I would say is take a look at some of the prescriptive guidance documentation when you start to think of, hey, what services we should implement and how we should implement, especially within an AWS organization environment, because one of the pieces is sandbox. And the reason why I call that out is the sandbox should have guardrails, but it should be that, exactly to Russ's point, that training ground, right? Where you have the wild encounters. You're like, okay, what does the service do? Before you even put into dev and UAT, test, all of those, use and leverage a sandbox environment. Because why? It's not connected to your network in any way, right? It's just an isolated place for learning. But I would say if I were to go first, I like the workshops. I go with 2, right? I would make a shout out to certifications and Elite Four challenge, right? Certificate knowledge, as we put that on the screen once, or maybe twice, just because it feels right, right? But as we delve back in a little bit, you start to think of, okay, workshops and documentation and places that we can go. Well, it might seem a little bit, I would say, challenging of where do you start with that? Oh, luckily,
someone was here to help.
If somebody was here to help, especially from, an Aura perspective, if somebody was here to help from a Knowledge Quest perspective, well, that's exactly what we have. And for your first time joiners, Knowledge Quest is those pieces of information you consume after your 5 a.m. run, right? You grab the beverage of your choice, coffee, tea, water, or other, and you start to say, hey, those two, Tristan and Russ, they were talking about something. What was it? What should I do? Well,
the run has me tired already.
Yeah, exactly. So let's take that step back out and talk about how to build some Aura with Knowledge Quests, which is essentially pieces of information and little, let's say, side quests that you can go on. And we want you to report back to us. How are you doing? How are you feeling? And give us some results. And I take that dramatic pause, as always, because it's fun. But it also adds to the memory aspect of just, hey, why did he take that pause? Well, he took that pause to convey the point of it's dangerous to go alone. We had that episode. So try and take a friend like Macie. So on your knowledge quest to build, where's the place you start? Well, you start at the L100 phase. You start at the data protection rookie phase. And what is that? Well, if we're talking about DLP tools in particular, we want to stay and think about something like Amazon Macie. What is it? Because you start to get the concepts of what the service is by going to the documentation pages. And within those documentation pages, one place I start to say is go to the concepts and terminology. So you're speaking the same language. Makes life a lot easier. And it also makes you understand some concepts that kind of go across other services as well. When you have a delegated administrator and what's a member account and what's a standalone account, all these type of things, they start to repeat a little bit. And you start to build up the experience points or the XP points that gets you to a point that you say, hey, let me go on to the next one. Let me go on to the next one and the next one and the next one. This is kind of how you build up your overarching L100 knowledge, especially when it comes to something like, okay, we are searching S3. So now what we have to do is understand what are some of the security best practices for S3. If all our data is going into the bucket, how do we kind of secure that? Well, what are all these pieces of the puzzle? They're right here. This is kind of why we want to call this out. First, go to the S3 page, go to the security place, and then the security best practices. This is the up, down, down, left, right of figuring out how to secure your S3 buckets. And then eventually you can say, okay, I have a general understanding of Macie. I have the S3 bucket. Now, what findings can be generated? This is how you get to kind of the next level. What is that next level? Well, that's how you become a data guardian. Elite. Right? I would say Elite 4, but it's more than 4. At least sometimes. And when you go to that next level, you start to think of how you can customize it and figure out your own environment. And as Russ was mentioning, custom data identifiers. It's a very important part because now you're starting to delve into learning, or you have learned how the service works. Now you can start to manipulate the service to your environment, or I should say customize to your environment a little bit, right?
Yep.
So I would say, and I toss this to you, Russ, is how often do you see kind of custom data identifiers and them serving a greater purpose within a customer environment?
Not very often, but that's usually because they're coming to me because they didn't enable these features and didn't implement these mechanisms. So yeah, exactly. It really, like, for example, in this specific scenario, I don't see a lot of those types of customers because the ones that do are much less likely to come to my team.
Yeah, and that's the important part is you kind of want to ask Russ. So if you ever see Russ, just ask him like, hey, what haven't you seen? Or what have you seen? And then it's like, okay.
You know what? If you want an angry rant, you go ahead and ask that question and I'll tell you all the things that are annoying me every day. Just don't do those things and you'll be fine.
Yeah. So you heard it here first. Custom data identifiers. Do this. A custom data identifier a day keeps Russ away. So we go down that route. And then you start to think of, okay, other pieces, and then how you evaluate findings, especially within Security Hub. We talked about building out your team. Now you have S3, you have Macie, you have Security Hub. Now you start to have those different pieces identified. Now you can start to delve into, how do I become a champion, a legendary data champion, a Macie champion, or an AWS champion, depending on how you want to look at it. So the way you do that is scale, right? And why do I say scale is one of the ways you do that? It's because how you expand your environment in a way that is secure. Well, you have to have an understanding of, one, everything your environment touches, and two, what are the guardrails around your environment? And what is the visibility into it, right? It's not as easy as the Lion King and saying everything the light touches, but you can come close with some visibility, right? You have CloudWatch, you have these services like Macie to scan for sensitive data services, and you start to go down the route of exploration and using a sandbox environment. But also, you start to figure out, okay, AWS organizations, what do I do? Now, if we go back to the IAM side of the house and kind of put that at the forefront, you could put into place SCPs, service control policies. And what comes with service control policies? I would say a tagging strategy. And what is the tagging strategy usually based off of? Well, how do we protect our data, our resources, things of that nature? So if we continue down that train of thought, you start to see and pick up what I'm putting down just a little bit, because you start to get to the point of now everything in my organization is tagged. And if it's not, it's getting remediated, right? It's not going to be public, so on and so forth. And that starts to help build out your DLP strategy, because now you have to go through a lot of more checkpoints in order to get something out there. But if you want to practice a little bit more, often suggest kind of going to data discovery, right? So there's been a lot of AWS events. There's Reinforce and Reinvent. Hey, reach out and say, hey, I'm curious about Macie. And this is like one of the workshops that can be, run at AWS sponsored event. So always like to throw it out there, because people ask, where do I start? Well, for you, start with the security reference architecture and then come to the event, or you can come to the event chat. But the reason why I say this is a good place to start off, because, hey, this is an example of how an architecture can be defined, right? How something like Control Tower and AWS organizations can be implemented. But it also says, you see, deploy solutions. In the corner, bottom left, there's a big M, right? It doesn't stand for marvelous. It stands for Macie. And the reason why that is because data protection is important, especially when you think of your reference architectural examples. So we take that pause, that zoom in to say, take a look at the readings, report back to us, tell us how you did, what worked out, what didn't work, and maybe we can make some side quests out of it, right? Because it's fun to go on side quests. Well, Russ, if you had a takeaway for the people, what would it be? Dramatic pause. Again, I'm just going to keep using it this episode. It's one of those episodes.
So I think the takeaway from this episode is really to just start. You can't run before you walk. You can't walk before you crawl, and you can't crawl if you're not moving at all. So once you start, I think there'll probably be smaller mistakes and whatever, but just getting those implemented and working as you go, and an I really tried to pronounce that part. Iterative process, with constant progress, you can create a really strong DLP, mechanism within your organization just by, getting slightly better as you go on. And also always have an incident response plan.
Yeah, that's an important key word that we always like to say, right? Is have that IRP plan. And what comes with that? Well, the experience. And how do you get the experience? By taking one step at a time and doing it, and doing workshops and reading, because each one of these tasks has XP tied to it. If you don't see your own level up bar, you will when you take a look back at your environment a year from now, 2 years from now, or even a week from now, because you have leveled up yourself and your environment and your own knowledge base. Then come back, share it, let us know how it is. Yeah. Like and subscribe as well. I always like to throw that in a little bit unexpectedly, because it's fun, but also it's fun to come back and go on these side quests, right? So until next time, we bid you adieu. Thank you. Take care. Have fun. Arrivederci and all those kind of good things, right? All right. Have fun. Take care.
Good Monday, everyone.